Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Coal Scene. We are here today with Congresswoman Shelley Moore Capito to talk about some of the pending legislation that's taken place in Washington, D.C. We're going to start today's program by focusing a little bit on cap and trade legislation, which just narrowly passed the U.S. House of Representatives and is pending before the U.S. United States Senate. Congresswoman Capito, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to join us here today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Let's begin by talking about cap and trade legislation. Okay. We hear a lot about cap and trade today. Mm-hmm. Why don't we start by just focusing a little bit on what it means and how it will impact the state of West Virginia.
Okay, well, what cap and trade is, basically the goal is to cap carbon dioxide emissions, and it becomes part of the climate change discussion. The thought is that the planet is warming and it's caused by emissions of carbon dioxide. So this piece of legislation caps the carbon dioxide emissions, and in a very onerous way, I might add. And then for those electrical generators who use a lot of coal that does emit carbon dioxide, they would then have to either fit the electrical generation plant to lower the emission, or they would have to trade their emission points and buy the ability to emit from other or on the open market. So that's where the trade part comes in. But what I think is, I think you have to look at the bigger picture here, in that across the country, over 50% of the electrical generation in this country is by the burning of coal. And in West Virginia, it's 98% of our electricity is through the use of coal. And so this piece of legislation, I believe, picks winners and losers. And the losers are those states, such as West Virginia and a lot of the Midwestern states and the southern states, that are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. The heavy hand of government is coming down on them and saying, you must meet these standards that are very tough for them to meet, or you will pay a lot of money to get permission to continue. And so that's the cap and trade philosophy. I think it's modeled after some of the things they're doing in Europe.
A lot of people tend to think that this is an issue that just impacts the coal industry mm-hmm. and other fossil fuel-based industries. And while it certainly has a dramatic impact on coal and other basic industrial jobs, it also affects every West Virginian. One way, shape, or form, and perhaps every United States citizen as well.
Right, it does. It particularly impacts individual West Virginians, because the electrical producers are going to have to pay to meet these standards. And how do they pay? Well, they ask the ratepayer to pay, and that's every single West Virginia. The cost of their energy goes up. But it's not just the cost of flipping on a light. Let's go to another sector, like the farming sector, the agricultural sector. They're heavy energy users, and they're very intense with the cost of transportation. And all these things would be heavily impacted by a cap and trade scenario because of the rising costs of energy, the rising costs of fuel, the rising cost of feed. All these things play into how much it would cost for agriculture. Therefore, the cost of our food would go up. I think also, if you look at the manufacturing sector, for instance, in the northern part of the state where we have a lot of steel, they are heavy on using fossil fuels to produce steel, and there's no question that the cost of doing business for them would increase incrementally. And I think then you got to look at not just what's it going to cost you for your electrical bill or your gas bill or other things. It could cost you your job. And those states that have a lot of heavy manufacturing or a lot of manufacturing jobs, like West Virginia, also stand to lose in this scenario. And so not only, sort of a job killer kind of prospect, I believe, for certain parts of the country. And a company like that, whether it's a steel producer or other manufacturing facilities, what are they going to do? They're going to look at their bottom line costs, and my fear would be that they could close down and move their facilities offshore, China, India, or someplace else where it's cheaper energy costs. So there's all kind of layers, I think, ways that it impacts every single individual.
You mentioned China and India, and let's focus on that just for a moment. If you agree or submit to the fact that the burning of coal and other carbon-based fuels is really contributing to global climate change, and I want to emphasize that word global.
Right.
It is truly a global issue requiring a global solution.
Right.
I've been asked on the street and by other people that have an interest in this topic, what will we actually accomplish if in fact the United States imposes a strict cap and trade type legislation, but yet developing countries like China, Mexico, India continue in an unrestricted manner to use and burn coal?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to key on the phrase global. If global warming exists, and let's say that it does, it is an issue that needs to be addressed around the world. And what I think this legislation, and part of the reason I have objections to it, is because I think it puts us on an uneven playing field. We just saw the president just went to the G8 in Europe, and China was there, and one of the sort of topics that they got into was a requirement to clamp down on emissions by the year 2050. I mean, that's a long way away. And China basically stepped away from that, saying we're a developing country, we're going to develop economically no matter what, and we're going to continue to build coal-fired plants and other emitting manufacturing, have a manufacturing base. So I think the fact that we couldn't even get them at that point to make any kind of concessions tells me that until we really work in a true global sense, we're going to disadvantage our American worker. And I think that's something we have to look carefully. It's always a delicate balance between the economy and the environment. And I think that we can achieve the goals of lowering emissions, better, cleaner air through a whole variety of other ways, besides putting an onerous program onto not only our electrical producers, but also really our whole manufacturing and agricultural sectors.
It's kind of interesting, again, as you mention certain things, you're provoking some thoughts. And I had the opportunity to visit China here about a year and a half ago. And I was with the governor on a trade mission, and we were visiting and touring various coal plants, a coal to liquid plant. And I recall distinctly the governor asking the operator of this plant what they were doing with the carbon dioxide. And he said virtually nothing. We are not, at this plant at least, even contemplating carbon sequestration. He said, in fact, he said, Governor, you have to realize this is a developing country and we have provinces without light bulbs. He says, so until such time we can get a light bulb and electricity into the far reaches of the country, he says, we're not all that concerned about pollution. And he said, and this is what really caught my attention, he said, more importantly, he says, we are watching you. We are watching the United States very closely, trying to achieve this delicate balance of energy production and environmental control. And he says, and until you get it right, we're just basically sitting here in the wings watching how you manage that and how you accomplish your environmental goals.
Well, I think there's a couple things there. The fact that China has a large and developing coal to liquid sector is beyond us. We do not have that. I mean, I've been pressing for that, and so have others, to help ensure some energy security for our country, so we're not so heavily reliant on foreign sources of oil. But at the same time, I think you touched on another area that is extremely important, and that's the technology and research that's moving forward, both at our Marshall and WVU and across the country, where we're trying to meet the challenge of capturing the carbon and sequestering the carbon so that it isn't emitted, or it's emitted in fewer amounts, And so I think that we have to really, I think that's the sector we need to do this right and smart, and to push the research and development and technology of coal and carbon capture is a very smart way to do it. But we can't, this is another problem I have with the bill, if we push down the emissions so quickly and so rapidly, our technology to capture those emissions hasn't caught up to that. And I think we can. I mean, I think we can innovate anyway, and we've got a lot of people working on it. And so, you know, maybe that's what China's waiting for too, is for us to innovate our way to a way to capture this. But I think that's something we need to move forward on.
Well, that's certainly a good point. The other thing, I hear those on occasion who are real proponents of this legislation and political leadership. And they will often say that we need to show leadership as a country, and we need to be the first to get out there on cap and trade, show the other countries like China that we're serious, and in hopes that they will follow. Well, I have to admit that, especially after being in China and realizing that the pollution is much worse than I envisioned before I ever landed there, that they haven't followed our lead yet. You know, we have installed various technologies to control our sulfur dioxide, our nitrogen oxide, ground level ozone. We have spent literally billions of dollars to clean up our air quality, and countries like China have not followed that lead on trying to implement the most basic air quality issues.
Well, I mean, I've heard the same conjectures that we're the ones that need to lead, and you know, I don't reject that so much. I mean, I do believe we need to lead in a lot of directions. I think we do. We are the superpower in the world, but we want to stay that way. We want to stay, and in order to do that is to assure our economics and our growth. And certainly we're having a slowdown right now, and we know how much that hurts. And I think that if we impose certain standards that we have difficulty meeting, that the rest of the world has no intention of meeting, then have we met the stated goal, which is to control the climate and the climate change? And there are conjectures out there that say there will be no difference in what happens unless the other countries, particularly the developing countries, join on. So I think we need to look at a different way of looking at it. I mean, I'm on a bipartisan bill where we would create more drilling offshore, to use those dollars to incent research and development, and nuclear is something that never gets talked about very rarely. You know, more natural gas, more coal, clean coal, all the variety, conservation, renewables, all these kinds of things that wouldn't really tax the American people. And I think we would then achieve some level of environmental cleanup on the carbon dioxide side.
Seems like there's a lot of issues on the plate here.
Yeah.
And I've heard some within the coal industry, in fact, say that historians may very well characterize this period of time that we're in here today as the energy age. We've gone through the industrial age, we're sort of moving past the information age, and with all the emphasis on global climate change, energy production, the whole renewable portfolio, and the role it's going to play in our future energy mix. And it's kind of an interesting point that's made.
It is, and I think a lot of that too is security based. I think what we have found is that we're relying as a country on our energy, or you know, at least our oil, from certain areas of the country that don't, in a lot of cases, don't particularly like us.
Absolutely. And
that can be very punitive for us. And I think that we all agree that that's probably not a wise way for us to go. And that's why I think we're looking at, and that's one of the reasons we're looking at all the other resources more closely, especially those, you know, that we have at home. And I think that, you know, I'm all for renewables. I think it's going to help every energy sector. The other thing I think we need to look at is we're huge consumers of energy. And I think that really requires us to really look individually and as a company or a business entity to figure out ways to really use our energy smarter. I was in Germany, where a lot of the rooms that you have when you walk in, the lights are off. You walk in, the light comes on. They have a motion detector. These are the kinds of things that in Europe, because I think they're more conscious of it, they are doing day to day. And I think these are ways that we could make changes. I always think about Jimmy Carter, because he tried to get us to do it, and we just sort of, once oil went back down, we went back to our old ways.
Well, you mentioned green jobs, and everybody talks about renewable energy forms today. A lot of coal miners are concerned, obviously, and you've always watched out for their interests during your tenure in Congress. But one of the things I hear a lot of miners say is, why do we have to trade a mining job for one of these green jobs, whatever those may be? And specifically, they say, if there's a green job to be had, let's have it.
Right.
Why do we have to trade one for one or one for two?
No, I just don't. I don't think we should be doing that. And I think we should be protecting and fighting for our coal miners here and the coal jobs. They're very important. They support families, communities, generations, and in a lot of cases are very well paid. And I think that's one of the areas, and I believe we can have the green jobs. But if you look at a lot of what the green jobs are created, they're lower paying. In a lot of ways, if you trade a heavy energy intense job like a coal mining job for a green job, you might be 4 coal miners for 1 green job. That to me is and I think that's what they found in other countries that have tried this. I think I'm with you. I mean, I think there's we should be able to sustain a good and healthy coal employment and not have to trade it for a green job. Let's add the green jobs. That's even better.
Exactly. If there's a green job to be had, then let's have it. Let's try to attract it and set up the infrastructure to sustain it. The time we're in right now, I mean, we're clearly in a national recession, and it just seems so incongruous today where we are. All states are feeling the pain, some more so than others, but it just seems incongruous to even talk about legislation that would potentially cut into some of those base industrial jobs at a time when everybody's just searching everywhere to try to boost their employment ranks or to hold on to what they have.
Right. I think we are at a time when people are basically, I think you're right, trying to hold on and ride it out. And there's a lot of uncertainty there. Young people are having difficulty finding jobs across this country. And that concerns me. Elderly people are having trouble making ends meet in terms of when they're on a fixed income. I don't know why we would go forward with an agenda that basically is going to be more costly for all of those folks. At the same time, I realize, I mean, I'm in politics, and I realize some of this is driven by a new politics that exists in Washington, D.C. So, I mean, I accept that, but that doesn't mean I have to like it, and that doesn't mean I have to support it, and I think we need to do it smart. And I think what you're seeing is a reaction to a new president, a new Congress, a new philosophy, and we'll have to see how that plays out. And I think you're seeing a lot of resistance. We certainly did see it in the House of Representatives, and I expect we'll see that again when this issue becomes on the agenda for the U.S. Senate.
Well, it's kind of interesting. The time and schedules has changed a couple times on us, but from all indications, it is a piece of legislation that's now moved across the aisleway. And there are deliberations. There seems to be a lot of rather intense discussions that's taken place, some publicly, some behind the scenes, as politics typically works. But do you have any feel for when the Senate may actually take this up and vote on it?
I really don't, except I think it won't be until the fall. If you look at what we're doing now in Washington, we have healthcare has taken over from cap and trade all of July, and I expect that to continue in through August and September, assuming that we don't do something by the end of next week. But so I think that cap and trade has sort of been moved down the agenda line in terms of the discussion, but I think we need to keep it up there in terms of the level of our intensity, because I received thousands of emails, letters. We've had a couple of general rallies here in West Virginia, trying to raise the level of awareness. When it starts hitting people's pocketbooks, I can tell you that's when people really start paying attention. And I think that's what's happening now with healthcare, and I expect that's what will happen again once cap and trade begins to be a part of the discussion in the Senate. And if you look what happened in the House, in the middle of the night, right before it passed, there was a 300-page amendment that was added in at like 3 o'clock in the morning. People would say, well, don't they do that in Congress all the time? Maybe, but they do it for one reason, and that's to get a few more votes. And that's what they did. They bought a couple, not bought seriously, but got a couple people to vote because they're from the agriculture sector, or they're from a certain part of the country that makes solar panels, or they're from a certain part of the country that likes nuclear. And so that's how they were able to cobble together enough votes to pass this in
Trying
June.
to win the few people over.
Try to win the few people over.
To ensure the vote count.
Yeah. So it changed as it went through, and I imagine that's what the Senate, I think, is a lot different dynamic, because it doesn't have the, we're so the large population centers pretty much rule in the House.
Well, California has how many
California,
representatives?
Yeah, over 50.
Over 50 compared to our 3 here.
Right.
And fortunately, all 3 of our representatives voted against this bill. And we understand that, have heard that both Senator Byrd and Senator Rockefeller have reservations about this bill and are concerned about the potential impacts. One of the things, and we compliment you for being so outspoken and so protective of West Virginians and coal miner jobs as it relates to this bill. It still makes up a large contingent of our state employment. Speaking of which, it seems like there's a number of issues that are unfolding here that have a threatening implication: mountaintop mining, surface mining, and we won't get into that much. But the point I want to make is surface mining today and mountaintop mining collectively account for, it's pushing close to 50%, 40-some% of our coal mining jobs, of our coal mining production, comes from mountaintop mining and surface mining today. So it's truly a much more, it's a more significant component of our industry than what it was before. And it seems like there's a lot of threat that's existing there as the debate rises to new levels.
Right, and that's really being carried forward by the regulators, the EPA and Fish and Wildlife and the Corps of Engineers. And I think the new administration has come in and wants to rework the way that they're looking at the Clean Water Act and putting permits forward. And I think the coal industry can live with that as long as they have the certainty as to what they're supposed to do. And I think that's where the problem is coming in. There is no certainty. There are these permits that are out there that haven't been either permitted or rejected or refined. And I've met with all of these folks and said, we want to move forward in West Virginia. We want to do it within the legal bounds of the law and the regulation, but tell us what these are. Don't let us move forward and then say, slap us back and say, no, we didn't mean, you can't really do that. And I think that's what we're asking for, is the certainty with some kind of speed too. They're moving very slowly, and I think it's very frustrating, and I think it could end up cost a lot of jobs, and in the end we want to do it right. And so I think, with those parameters we should be able to find a happy medium. It's just that there have been a lot of changes, and I know that that's been difficult for people working in the coal industry, coal miners, and their families.
Coal miners and their families, they're perhaps the real victim in this. There's a lot of corporate dollars that are stranded without the certainty of whether they're going to receive a permit or at what point in time in the process. And there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars invested that's, as I said, potentially stranded.
Right.
But the working miner and his family, and this has been going on now for close to a decade, and all the uncertainty. and they have families. They have payments to be made. They have a child or two that's if you look at the profile of today's minor, most have a child or two that's about to enter college, and so it creates a lot of stress. Particularly when they pick up the newspaper and see the headlines where there's more scrutiny, more concern. The debate now has moved into other states as well, where we often see legislation that's proposed that precludes a state utility from burning coal that comes from West Virginia. And so there's just a lot of stress in a lot of these households because of the uncertainty.
Well, it is stressful, and I think that these are professionals who take great pride in their work and work very hard and safely, and want to maintain a certain level of living. I mean, I think that's the goal for their families, and so with the certainty, I think we could move forward. But I mean, there is a debate: should we legislate rather than regulate? And we may get to that in order for us to be able to get some certainty to move forward. But for right now, unfortunately, I think everything's sort of in a limbo. And I think that makes it very difficult to make economic discussions and to give that minor the certainty that your job's going to be here in the next 5 years.
You represent an awful large district,
right?
The West Virginia 2nd Congressional District. And I read somewhere where it's characterized as being 20 or 30 miles wide and 300 miles long. Certainly a lot of issues. I know energy and coals dominate a lot of the agenda. You mentioned healthcare. Are there other issues that have emerged that are requiring a lot of your time right now?
Well, I do have a very diverse district because I go all the way from Mason County in the Ohio all the way to Shepherd to Charlestown on the Potomac, or Harper's Ferry. And that's what's great. I mean, West Virginia has a great variety, and I have that in our district. Healthcare is probably the big issue right now because there's so many folks that this is an economic threat, but there are also a lot of people who have their own plans through their business, and they want to be able to keep it. Jobs is huge. It always is in West Virginia. We're always kind of fighting that battle of how to create and keep jobs, keep our young people here. And I think that's still a challenge that's out there, and that's why I think with the energy sector that we have, it's important to keep that almost as our base load, like electrical